Hi there, thanks for joining us. I'm Phil Urban from the St. Paul Seminary, delighted to be joined by Bob Burns, who is a permanent deacon candidate. So Lord willing, that means he'll be ordained a permanent deacon for the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis this December. So I can't call you deacon yet.
No.
We're a couple months away. How you feeling? What's the vibe like as ordination approaches?
It's surreal in some ways because
Yeah.
you go through formation. It's 5-year formation. For me, it's been 7. So that's part of my story. But yeah, it's surreal as it's getting closer that it's going to be real. So.
Yeah. You mentioned a 5-year process. Yours has been a little unique, and we'll get into that. But just in general, I mean, what is preparation for becoming a permanent deacon like? What goes into it? At a high level.
Yeah, on the high level, there's 4 pillars of formation: the human formation, spiritual formation, intellectual formation, and then the pastoral formation. The human, they focus primarily on the first 2 years of formation. As there's a concerted focus on the human formation part. Is just really getting to know yourself better, your weaknesses, your strengths, and on the spiritual side, just learning how to really pray, and being more aware. And so those two kind of really feed into each other. As we learn more about ourselves, our strengths and our weaknesses, we can pray more intentionally. As we learn more methods of prayer, we can go deeper and we can ask for more specific things that come up during formation. And then intellectual is just really getting into the depth of 2,000 years of saints and intellectuals in the church, which is overwhelming a little bit, but great
in a good
crucial,
way.
In a good way, yeah. And then pastoral is really like, how do we integrate all those things? How do we put that knowledge and self-awareness to work for the Lord?
Yeah, go back to the human piece there a little bit. I don't know that I'd want to get to know myself a whole lot better. I mean, that opens you up, right? Maybe specifically what type of things are happening, whether it's in coursework, or is there some spiritual direction, or what goes into all of it?
Each one of us receives in the diaconate formation, receives a spiritual director. So that's a huge part of that formation as we go deeper each year and through the things that come up during classes and formation and things like that really kind of, I need to work on that.
Sure.
You have someone that gets to know you and that can go deeper with you on a consistent basis. On the human side, because we're going to be permanent deacons, most of us are married. So they focus that first year of human and spiritual formation. Our wives are required to come to formation with us. So they have a focus effort on making sure that our marriage is strong. So working on communication skills, all the things that I wish every couple could get in any formation for marriage was a great benefit to us. It's like we invest, the program invests in making sure that the couples themselves, that marriage is on solid ground, so that we can build off of that.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to a little later talk a little bit more about the marriage piece of it and what going through formation is like, not just for you, but for your spouse. But let's talk about just your story a little bit, what maybe triggered your desire to discern the permanent diaconate and what's led you to this point.
I think the moment was my wife, like a good Catholic, actually reads the bulletin after Mass. And our pastor had been one of the formators here at the seminary, so was involved in the diaconate formation interview process and things like that because he was here and could help with that. So he was a great proponent of that, would advertise that from the pulpit, from the bulletin.
Sure.
And she just simply asked me the question, have you ever thought about being a deacon?
Yeah.
And I look up at her, and inside I was laughing. She says it was audible, but my part of the story is it was an internal laughter. And I said, no, I've never thought about it. And then I quickly changed the subject, But over the course of the next few weeks, it kind of came up in prayer of like, really that...
Wow.
Why were you laughing? Yeah, why were you laughing?
Right. Like you reacted,
And there's more of human formation that comes up in that, why I did that. Fear unknown, not knowing what that really was. But then maybe God actually was asking me. I didn't want to ask the question to God.
Yeah.
Do you want me to be a deacon? I didn't want to ask that question because I didn't want the answer.
Yeah.
So at that moment, yeah. So
what led you to, I mean, obviously you asked
I did.
the question
Yeah.
and got an answer. Here we are, right?
Yeah. So service, as I went, I got to the point where I like, okay, Ashley, who's my wife, I'll go to the information session. So I went and I heard this presentation on what a deacon was. And this was the first time I'd experienced deacons. I've seen deacons, but really just from the liturgical mass, preaching the gospel. Yeah. Preaching homily.
He's the priest assistant up there with a little bit different
He's up in front
robes.
of everyone, and the lights are on him and things like that when he's preaching and doing those things. So that was just like this one dimension and very shallow understanding of what a deacon really was. And so when they described about the deacon, the root of the word deacon is to serve, diaconia, to serve. Mm-hmm. That just struck me because when I was leaving or finishing up my college experience, I was discerning what I was going to do next, if I was going to go into the workforce, if I was going to, I was applying to be a missionary at the time too, and I was also discerning to join the military. And to serve really is something that resonated with me in the military sense. And so I thought that this is what the Lord wanted me to do, is to serve. And when I heard serve, I thought, of course, the military was the most known in my life. And so I pursued that. And then when I think it was Deacon Joe Mahalik talked about diaconia, it just kind of was like, I was like, oh man. Yeah. Like this.
You're talking to me right now.
You're talking to me, yeah. And this is maybe something that I've been pursuing and just not fully grasping. Sure. Because my service has been good in the Navy, and I'm thankful for it, and it's taught me so much about myself and the experience that I've gained from that. But there was something lacking, something that wasn't really fulfilling, that I was like, this
You're
is
like, I
all
can take this somewhere else. Yeah.
And maybe this is what God was really asking me to do way back then. Sure.
What a beautiful journey. So your wife kind of asked the initial question, was she like pushing it?
No, yeah.
That was all it took, was that. The wives are smart. They don't, there's not many wasted words, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think it was.
She wasn't like, hey, you should do this. But I mean, she's working as an instrument in the Holy Spirit too. And
she read in something in that she saw in me. Mm-hmm. Maybe she didn't fully understand what the deacon was, but wanted to ask that question. She was inspired to ask that question for whatever reason in that moment. She's much holier than I am, so Holy Spirit was there.
Sounds a lot like my marriage. So
marry up. That's key.
That's right. Punch up, not down. Yeah. Very true. You mentioned the Navy. Yes. So maybe let's go back to the beginning. We'll work our way to that. So you grew up, we were talking on the way over here, rural community, kind of west central Minnesota.
So, I grew up about an hour west of Minneapolis in a small town of Watertown. I grew up just outside of that, between Watertown and Winsted and Hollywood Township, the original Hollywood too, by the way.
The OG Hollywood?
Yeah, the original, And
I didn't even know that was there. I didn't grow
up here.
Hollywood
Township, so I grew up on a farm that's been in my family for over 100 years. Three generations or so, I think, in Western, so right on the edge of the Archdiocese.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. What'd you guys farm?
A little bit of everything, as my dad said. Corn and soybeans, and then we had cattle and pigs mostly when I was old enough to help.
So, that is a lot.
Yeah.
I grew up in Nebraska. We're very proud of our corn, but when I moved here 10 years ago, I learned that Minnesota, I believe the stat is correct, produces more corn than Nebraska.
I wouldn't have guessed that either.
Yeah, keeping us fed and keeping the animals fed. I mean, it's used for so many different things. Yep. So that's awesome. So you're up there. You went to Steubenville for college, right? So
my undergraduate in Steubenville.
Yeah. Yep. And then did you go right into the Navy from there?
I thought that I was going to, but I had some medical things that held up my application, so it took me 2 years after college. So,
and did you enlist for full active duty? Because you're a reservist now.
Yep.
And work as a
I
civilian.
was active duty, yeah. So I got accepted into officer candidate school.
Okay.
And went down to Pensacola, Florida for the Navy. And it was commissioned in Pensacola in 2004.
Okay. How long were you active duty?
I spent about 11 years on active duty. And then since I've been in the reserves, I've been mobilized once. So I'm pushing about 13 years total.
Total?
Yeah. An active time, yep.
Sure. You been deployed or got any good stories?
Yeah, good stories.
That you're allowed to share?
Yeah. My early career, like just fresh out of boot camp and school and stuff like that, I was deployed on the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier, part of the Air Wing. And that was 2005, 2006. So we were deployed into the Persian Gulf supporting the war in Iraq. Yeah. And then I spent a year in Baghdad after that. So I did a sea deployment, and then I did a year individual augmentation, they called it, in Iraq. So I spent a year in Iraq there supporting the Army primarily. I was on the base the whole time around the airport, so I never left the base. Okay. So I wasn't in too much of harm's way in that sense, in the grand scheme of things. So God kind of protected me through all of that, didn't ask me to... Still
Baghdad.
There. Yeah, it was Baghdad. I mean, 2006, 2007.
Yeah.
Some graces that came out of that is I had a household brother. At Franciscan, we have households, Christian fraternities. He joined the Army. I joined the Navy. He joined the Army after college. We ended up being stationed in Baghdad at the same time. So we were there for almost a year. So we spent... Every Sunday I would drive to his side of the base. I'd pick him up. We'd go to mass. We'd drink coffee and catch up and stuff like that. So we got to kind of reunite at that point in Baghdad, of all places. That's awesome. Yeah. So
was there anything you saw about? It's gonna seem like a loaded question, but just you're in a different part of the world. Yeah. Obviously, you're there for a reason. We're recording this September 12th. Yesterday is the anniversary of 9/11. I mean, I'm sure you learned a lot about humanity, or saw a different side of humanity, at the very least culture, right? How did that just kind of shape your experience and who you are as a man? And then after that I'll ask you your favorite color.
Thank you. Lighten it up a little bit. Growing up, being in the military, war, watching movies and things like that, you kind of get this idealized version of what that might be, and you have this kind of stereotypical like bravado that goes along with that. When you remove that separation and the reality hits, there's the reality of because of our fallenness, war can be necessary, right? Yep. And the church even talks about just war. But the reality is death is not it's a consequence of the fall, right? So it affects us, it hardens us, calluses us. And so when you are in proximity to that, especially our service members that have experienced, combat, have experienced death of their enemy, or it's a death of another human being with an immortal soul. So it affects you. Yeah. And so that's something you have to kind of wrestle with, even if it was justified. It's still, you're not going to be unchanged after that. So,
you're not celebrating.
Yeah, even if you're not culpable of a sin in a death, it doesn't not change you. So there's still that callousness that comes along with that. So you lose some of that maybe zeal or naivete about it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a lot of us who need to remember that, because thanks to people serving like you, and thank you for your service, we don't have to worry about those things. So I think it's good to be reminded. So what's your kind of full-time job now is working as a kind of civilian support for the Navy,
right? Yeah.
And then you're in the reserves as well.
Yeah,
what goes into that?
A Navy civilian. So I'm a federal employee of the Navy. So I work Monday through Friday and I grow a beard and can show up. And then
let's go. Yeah.
I'm still a reservist. So I just had
Okay.
my 19-year anniversary in the reserve, or not in service, yesterday. So that
Congrats.
was,
That's awesome.
So I would have never imagined that it would be me 19 years later still in the uniform. That wasn't my intent when I joined. You know, it's like to do my service and then move on to the next thing.
Sure.
There's a balance there that you try to. There's a lot of things pulling you in different directions.
Yeah.
Being away from your family 2 weeks a year and 1 week a month takes its toll on your family, and then being mobilized along with that.
Is there I think people, at least in the Twin Cities, are more familiar with like National Guard and Air National Guard. But like, where are you located, or where are you working out of?
We work out of the Air Force Reserve Base near Fort Snelling. They're connected to the airport.
Sure.
So if you see the C-130s, the big prop cargo planes, right there, the Navy has a building on that facility that all the reserves drill at. Yep.
And where do you go for your 2-week deal every year?
You can do it locally here, or you can do it at your supported command. So it just depends on
or
at a school or training.
So do you ever go up to Camp Ripley, or is that
for
just
us? It's primarily for Army and Marines go up there a lot.
Okay.
But for the Navy, we don't really do that level of training.
Stay local.
Yep.
Super cool.
Mm-hmm.
My kids are going to be excited when I tell them I met someone who sees C-130 planes every day. How'd you and your wife meet?
We met, I got back from Iraq and I was stationed in Colorado Springs, of all places. So there is a secret sub base underneath the mountains of Colorado. Just kidding. It's not. At least not that I know of.
Well, I love you things because that's where the Air Force Academy is.
Yeah.
That's all just a front for the Navy's stuff.
No. There's a joint command that's there.
Sure. Yeah.
It has all the services represented there, and we were just part of the Navy contingent of that service. So I was there in Colorado Springs. My wife was teaching up in Denver. Okay. And she happened to be living with a roommate who was good friends with my sister at Franciscan. And just because we had that mutual connection, she invited me up to an event and we got to meet. And then one thing led to another and we started dating. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How'd you guys end up back in Minnesota then?
Minnesota.
Back home? Or?
Yeah. So we got married in Colorado Springs and then we got stationed in San Diego. And my wife is from Southern California.
Oh, okay.
So kind of closer to her side of the family, or some of them anyway still. And we kind of had a decision point to make. I had been in the Navy about 8 years, and that's like halfway through retirement. So you kind of have to start making a call of like, am I going to invest in the Navy as a career for 20 years and go for retirement and serve that way, or am I going to transition and kind of move on to the next thing in the civilian life? And my dad's health at the time was not great. So there was just kind of a pull to come back home. And like, as far as raising a family, we didn't feel like we wanted to raise a family moving every 2 years. In the military life, that would have been the case. Yeah. So we ended up being able to get stationed here. Okay. There's kind of a providential story to that too, but we ended up being stationed here on active duty, serving the reserves. That eventually became a reservist, but
okay. What's the providential story? I mean, you don't usually get to raise your hand in that world and say, please send me.
That's part of it.
Yeah.
So we had that discussion. The Navy has a detailing process. You have an officer who's assigned to your community, and he says, hey, we've got these openings. This is what your options are. You have an element of choice in that. Okay. But a lot of it's due to timing when you're set to rotate.
Yeah.
I told him my situation. I'm like, hey, we're thinking about moving back to Minnesota. I saw that there's this one billet in Minnesota. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even know that there would be a billet in Minnesota, so that was kind of providential in itself.
Yeah.
And he called back to me. He's like, I talked to the person who's there. They're going to extend, so you can't fit in that billet. So what's your choice? What are you going to do? And I just told him, like, I'm going to submit my letter of resignation. And I didn't have any obligation of service, so I can do that.
Yeah.
And he was like, here's the process. You go ahead and do that. And I submitted my letter to my admin officer and my command, and I had a year left. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh,
Like in your head, like you're
I'm
on the way out. Yeah.
I'm done, and then I'll have to find a job
Yeah.
and do that next thing. So that was a little bit stressful, but like 3 or 4 weeks later, he calls me back unprompted. Like I thought we were done talking,
Yeah.
you know? And he was like, I just got a billet moved to Minnesota for you. And I was like,
Huh.
You did what? Like, I didn't
must have
ask
wanted
you to
you
do
there.
that.
Yeah.
He was like, I just got the, 2-star admiral to sign off on it to move this billet from Chicago to Minneapolis. And I was like, you did what? What are you talking about? He's like, did you submit your letter of resignation? I'm like, yeah, I did. You told me to, And he was like, go check to see where it's at, And so I go down to my admin office. I'm like, how long ago did you send it? Like 3 weeks ago, right when I gave it to you. He's like, he pulls up his stack of papers.
Yeah.
You mean this one? And I was like, I didn't know if I wanted to punch him or to kiss him.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's how I got sent back to Minnesota for 2 years. And I kind of transitioned. I learned all about the reserves and I transitioned.
That's
so it was kind
awesome.
of unprovoked, kind of like the Lord wanted me.
Yeah,
to come
obviously.
here.
Yeah.
And then shortly after we got here, we were trying to have children, and we weren't able to have children the first 3 years of our marriage. Shortly after we got to Minnesota, we found out we were expecting our first child. So
there is something in
there's something
the water
in the water, yeah.
in
There's
Minnesota.
definitely Hollywood water, I think.
That Hollywood water. That's hilarious. So you have 4 kids?
We have 4, yep.
And the youngest is 2 months, you're saying?
2 months,
Congrats.
yeah.
That's
July
amazing.
20th. She
How
was
old
born.
are the other ones?
8, 5, and then 2.5, and then 2 months.
So diaconate formation is not a 1 hour a week online course.
No.
It's very intense. How have you made it all? You and Ashley.
The simple answer is
work.
grace, right?
Yeah.
Like when we talked about being called, Lord, do you really want me to call? And when you make a decision, you make a pros and cons list, and then you're like, Lord, these are all the cons, and they're like, we have an 18-month-old at home, my oldest, who's 8 now. It was 18 months at the time. We would like to have more kids, but we had struggled.
The oldest was 18 months when you started this journey.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we like to have more kids.
Yeah.
We wanted to have more kids, but we didn't know if we were going to be able to have more kids because it took us almost 3 years to have the first one. So it really kind of it's all in God's hands, right? He has us. And so we had all these, I could be mobilized, I could be taken out of formation. I didn't have a job at the time because I was transitioning from active duty, so I was unemployed technically when I applied. I just looked at my application, unemployed, and put on it. And
this will catch their eye.
And the Deacon Joe was like, you're going to have to find a job. They don't pay deacons very well. So if you're thinking it's going to be a thing, don't think that. And I was like, I know that. I'm trying to find a job.
Yeah.
And God provides in that. But we had this stack of pros and cons. I really feel God is calling me to do this, but that was kind of my pro and the service piece that really hit home to me.
Yeah.
And I had, part of my human struggle is to respond to God's call. So oftentimes I hear things that I feel like God wants me to do and I just don't respond. And it stagnates and it withers, right?
Sure.
And he was really trying to rock me out of that complacency. He's
Yeah.
like, no, I want you to respond. I'm calling you right now. So at least you need to apply. And so I was like, all right, Lord, I'll apply. They're going to turn me back because of all these cons that there are. They're going to turn me away. And somehow I made it through the initial review of the application, the initial interview, the panel interview, the psychological profile, all those things.
Well, that's the other thing too.
Yeah.
They don't just take anybody.
Yeah.
It's kind of an intense process.
It is an intense process. Yeah, much more than I understood when I was like, yeah, I should do this. And then I saw the application itself was like a stack of stuff, questions. So
yeah.
But God showed me that there were these obstacles that I saw. Some were just in my imagination or lack of trust of that he would provide in that. And then some were like, no, I'm going to actually let you carry that one. That is going to be an obstacle and that's going to be a struggle.
Yeah.
But I still want you to pursue this.
Yeah.
And he's kept me going through that. and it, left formation, came back in formation, started my second class after my deployment. So
you were deployed.
I finished my aspirancy year with the deacon class that was ordained in 2021.
Okay.
So I finished that, and towards the end of that, I got notification that I was going to be mobilized the next fall. So it was like June. It's like you're leaving in September for a year.
And this is as a reservist at this point.
As a reservist.
Where'd you go?
I ended up going to Kuwait.
Wow.
To an army base in Kuwait, which, of all places in the world, is a relatively safe place.
Yeah, now.
So, not in 1990.
Thanks to some of the other stuff you were involved in, and even previously to that. Yeah, okay.
There was a kind of a well-established army base in Kuwait that I was at.
Wow.
There's a couple of them, yeah. So
was that even that providential timing? Because aspirancy is the first 2
It is now 2 years. Yep. So they just updated formation.
And then you at least had like a clean break.
Yeah.
To take a gap year in Kuwait.
Yeah, gap year. A year in the desert. Yeah, we call it. Yeah. It wasn't 40 days. I needed a little more work.
Yeah, right. Days. I know you feel
I probably needed more than that too. But I would say a year of spiritual and human formation focused on solidifying my marriage and communication and prayer and understanding was exactly what the Lord wanted to prepare me and my wife for that year.
Yeah.
Did it make it the separation easier? No, but it helped us become able to bear that load a little bit better, I think.
Yeah.
But it was still hard to remove that.
Was the plan to always re-enter formation once you got back? Or was there
no. That's
there?
a discernment process. The formation team here that oversees the diaconate formation was kind of like, well, this has never happened before.
Yeah.
So you're kind of the first one. Obviously, you can't continue on with your class because they're going to continue to take classes while you're gone. You're not going to be here, so you have to step out of formation. And then when you get back, reach out to us and we'll have a conversation and see where you're at. And then in spiritual direction, obviously, you bring that to a different, that was kind of on a practical level, just the reality of the situation. And then on a spiritual level, my spiritual director at the time just said, I want you to give this calling or this back to the Lord. I'm like, Lord, this is what you've given me. I'm being called to do this other thing that I don't have control of. If you want me to have it back, you'll give it back to me when I come back. And so that's kind of the process of preparation before I left that I had to do, so that I could focus on the mission that I was given there as a Navy officer, and then also to focus on trying to help my family through that time as well. And then like 3 days after I got to Kuwait, there was 600 plus Minnesota National Guardsmen that were there at the same time.
Wow.
So the Red Bills. And so I got to know some of the Catholics in that group. And one of them like, have you met our Deacon Bob? I'm like, what are you talking about, Deacon Bob? So there's another guy going through formation for a different diocese in Minnesota.
Oh, no way.
And so I got to connect with him. And then these deacon candidates were coming out of the woodwork. I met an Italian who is going to be ordained in October, here in a couple of weeks now, in Italy. He was an Italian officer, a military officer, who was studying to be the deacon. So I had breakfast with him every day, and we just talk about all that. So like that giving back to the Lord that my spiritual director asked me to do, he gave it back to me like in 3 days once I was on the ground in Kuwait. Like, no, I still want you to think about this. I couldn't get away from these deacons, you know.
There's maybe some peace that came with that too.
Yeah, right? And I think there was like that acknowledgement to like, well, at least I know I need to ask when I get back. I know. I keep pursuing him. So he kept it kind of alive. He didn't let that fire kind of dwindle out.
So you didn't see your wife and kids for a year in person? Or are you able to like? So
we had an R&R, a 2-week R&R, 10 days. We ended up meeting in Rome. So I flew from Kuwait, and then her and my 2 kids.
Like video calling every night, or how?
Yeah, there's the blessing of technology, right? It's still hard though. When she's trying to manage 2 kids at home.
Yeah, there's 2 kids at this point.
My youngest was 9 months old when I left. So he wasn't sitting up yet. And when I came home, he was talking and walking,
Oh,
so it's just
man.
like that, missing that piece of it, that day to day or moment to moment.
I like go golfing on a Saturday and I come home that night and my kid seems older. I can't imagine like what a year, half a year is.
My fear was that I would get home and they would like run away or cry.
Oh,
You know what I mean? Like, but thankfully, my wife is showing them pictures and we're talking on the video phone and doing all those things. So they didn't.
I wish we could have got your wife in here. I know she's busy watching kids, but man, like a year away from the military with 2 kids, she's been really supportive of the diaconate piece too. I mean, what an awesome woman it sounds like. What's that process in diaconate formation like for anybody? I mean, for you guys, there's some extremes there, but like you mentioned earlier, for most deacons. So I got to make sure I classify this right. So if you were like a single guy and you decided to become a permanent deacon, then once you're ordained, like you would not be allowed to marry.
Yeah. They'd be the same as
it's the same as a transitional deacon. You've taken a vow of celibacy. But there's sort of a provision or whatever the right word is for married men can enter the permanent diaconate.
Yes, married men can enter the permanent diaconate, and then if our wives would predecease us, then we would take on that vow of celibacy and wouldn't be able to be remarried.
So it ties you, I mean, while you're considered clergy, like there's these stipulations or things that are above and beyond what a layperson goes through. But that being said, most of the men are married, more often than not, and they've built kind of the wife's piece of it into formation. What does that look like practically? And then I think you've touched pretty well on what that's done for your marriage, but you are not in this alone. Like the wife is really along for the ride. And kind of a side note, and you can probably articulate this better than me, like it's really beautiful because your marriage is a sacrament too, like two become one, all that stuff. So it seems very appropriate that Mother Church would then like bring the wife not just along for the ride, but really she's part of the discernment process and formation as well.
And that's part of the discernment is your wife has to give consent. So the bishop is going to write a letter to Ashley asking for her consent to ordain, to be ordained.
Wow.
And she has to say yes. If she says no, then it doesn't happen. He won't do it. And so, that's an integral part of that. And part of that is, hopefully you don't find out 7 years into formation that it's no, but you don't know exactly everything. And that's why you actually sign on the dotted line in the end. But that formation is, the wives are invited to a lot of the formation, intellectual formation, the human formation, the spiritual formation for sure. They're required to go to that first year, which is really like digging into the human and spiritual formation. And then after that, it's optional. My wife would have loved to go to all of it, but just with our family and ages of our kids, we just couldn't do that. But she did, nurse a baby in the back of the class in the second half of our aspirants a year. And then,
I mean, it is pretty unique what you're doing. It's not like, I think it is stereotypical, like it's a bunch of old retired white dudes that this is for, but I think you're breaking that mold a little bit. And it is a lot more diverse, I think, than people realize, but still, like, nursing in the back of the room.
Two of my classmates have kids that are, in school age.
So it's a lot, but can be done. You're living proof of it. So
it takes a village, I would say. So it's like that willingness to be vulnerable and say, I can't do this on my own. And we wouldn't have been able to do it on our own. Deployment, same thing. Like people just come out of the woodworks to support my wife because I couldn't physically do anything for her. And same with babysitters and formation nights. And like tonight we have a babysitter that's coming to watch the 3 oldest ones. And my wife is coming down later for formation.
For class.
With the baby. Yeah. And then our classmates are giving her a ride, so it's just like all these things that come together that you depend on, that you have to be, you can't be macho or bravado about it, or like, oh, I'm going to do all this myself. The Lord just strips you away of that. It makes you vulnerable and humble.
Okay, I don't want to go too meta for a sec, but like, what is it about us as men? Because you mentioned it, like really that simple act with your call to the diaconate of just like, I'm not carrying this on my own, Lord, like I'm handing this back to you, like I'm giving you the control, show me the way. And you did that, and he of course came through, because he
Yeah.
always does. He's all
Yeah.
loving and all good. Like, it is hard to give up control, man.
Yeah.
Like, we are hardwired to, like, nope, I'm gonna wrap my arms around this, and I want to be the one to, like,
Yeah.
make it happen. And,
Yeah.
and it's a simple act, but it's a difficult action.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
No, it does. I think that conversation where I had to give not only the calling to the diaconate, but the care of my family
Yeah.
to the Lord.
Yeah.
Like, Lord, you love them best. You love them way better than I do. I trust them to you. And so the vocation in that too is like, I wanted to be the one that provide. I wanted to be the one that protects in ways that I do that. But ultimately, the Lord is the one who gives me the strength to do those things.
Yeah.
And even when I'm not here, he provides, because he's all loving Father who takes care of us, So, it's hard though. It's a struggle.
So hard.
Yeah. There may have been a few tears in those
No.
conversations and spiritual direction and with my wife. So.
Yeah, I mean, when you look, I know you're not ordained yet again, but when you look back and reflect on that, and what goes through your mind to
The 7 years
got
or
to this point, those ups and downs, those spiritual highs and lows, and
I think we can kind of build up the future into all these the con list, these things that I can see or perceive in the future. And we fail to live in the present moment.
Yeah,
and we get overwhelmed by the anxiety of what might be, and we miss what's right in front of us. And that opportunity to daily just give it over to the Lord. And I think that's ultimately like the thing that you need to plan, and you need to be prudent in that planning. But ultimately, you have to trust the Lord. And if he wants to shake that up, he's going to shake that up. He did for me. He gave me 11 months in the desert. One other cool thing about being in Kuwait, if there's a cool thing about being in Kuwait, all the Red Bulls know what I'm talking about, out there. On the base that we were at, as I was getting driven around, shown around the base, our senior enlisted guy, he was like, pointed out, it's like, this is where you're going to be living, and across the street, here's the chapel, and there's a tabernacle in there if you're Catholic. And I was like, sweet, there's like 3 tabernacles in Kuwait, something like that.
Wow.
And
right
2 of the bases have them, because they have military chaplains there, and then I think there's one that for the third country nationals that work in Kuwait, a lot of Filipinos, Indians, that work there. They have a church that ministers to them specifically.
So that's what I mean. For us in Minnesota, where there's St. Paul, where we're sitting right now, there's Catholic church every few blocks. That seems like a different universe. You know?
And that's part of like even being in Baghdad and having a chaplain, a military chaplain there. What a great gift it is to our service members to have access to the sacraments in the midst of war and the things that they have to deal with to combat that callousness, combat that hardness of heart that can come from war. Yeah. But he flippantly, he had a good one-liner. He was like, people normally on deployment, they become one of 3 things. They become a hunk, a chunk, or a monk. And I was like, this is right after he told me that the chapel was there and the tabernacle was there, and Jesus and the Eucharist was there. I was like, all right, Lord, you want me to be a monk? So I was able to start my day and end my day at the chapel, go to daily mass. What a gift. So he kept me close to his heart, even in the midst of the unknown. When you leave, you don't know where you're going to go exactly. You don't know what the circumstances are going to be there when you get there. You could be. I had another friend who was deployed, and he was away from access to the sacraments for 9 months in a combat zone where he went outside the wire every day. He didn't get to see a priest because he was so remote away. So there's that reality that could be what the Lord asks of you. But he kept me close. Yeah. What a gift, right? Yeah, what a gift. Yep.
Beautiful. What does a deacon do besides help the priest at mass?
Yeah. Yeah. So when Deacon Joe talked about the diaconia, or that service, the deacon is ordained in persona Christi servi, so Christ the servant. And so we carry Christ as the servant with us in our ordination, holy orders, but as a threefold service. So a minister to the word, a service to the word, so we get to proclaim the gospel, we get to preach a homily, and then we're a servant to the altar, so we get to serve in proximity to the altar in a unique way that only deacons can. And then we have that service to charity, to the heart, which our service to the altar and to the word and the relationship with the word of God really feeds that. So it's kind of a cyclical ministry. So it's not just charity or a good work that we're doing, but it's from the heart of the source and summit in the Eucharist, serving the altar, preaching the gospel in the liturgy, that we go out into the world. And as a deacon, you have a unique aspect that you kind of have a foot in both worlds. A lot of us are married men. A lot of us have employment in the civilian world, where we're working in the world, and to bring Christ the servant into that. Or if we're fathers in a parish church or a parish school community, that's where he wants to be, Christ the servant to be. That's where he wants me to be. So that's, for me, it's going to look a little bit different for each deacon, but that's kind of the heart of where he has me. And to bring the cares and worries and weights of the world from the pews to the altar.
No, most deacons, at least diocesan deacons, have like I think it's more on the charity side, like a certain ministry that you'll kind of focus on. So like some guys might visit folks in prison, some might do hospital.
Right. No. Yeah.
Has that been dictated exactly what you're going to be doing on that
for
front,
us, we stay at our home parish for 6 months, and that's kind of like our additional like hands-on training. After we're ordained, then we still have classes for that next spring semester. We'll have classes, and then we get our new parish assignment after that sometime in the summer, and then we also get that assignment to charity. So it could be hospital chaplaincy, it could be prison ministry, or some other assignment to serve.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So it's an ongoing journey. I mean, you hit ordination, but then you really, don't they kind of call it like an internship almost, like after you're ordained, or you know, you get a lot more hands-on experience,
right?
And
yep.
not just throwing you into
you're in
parish, like
you're in parish
life.
Yeah. So you're with your pastor. If you have an assigned deacon, you have the blessing of an example there at your home parish. And so you get to live the service to the word. You get to proclaim the gospel. You get to do the things that you've been studying and reading and preparing for.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you're probably aware of this, but because you decided to take so long, you're actually part of history.
Yes.
One of 18 men scheduled for permanent diaconate ordination. That ties the largest group ever for this archdiocese, which was set in 1978. What does that mean to you and to the group? Because I imagine you guys have become you become fairly close with your class throughout the process.
I've been blessed to get to know 2 different classes.
So I've
kind of got a foot in both worlds, and it's a unique experience for sure. The size, it just when you meet the men that God is calling to discern this, they're men who desire to do God's will. Yeah. And you're like, these are the men that I need in the trenches next to me, you know, like you're amazed by their story, how God got them there. And because all of us are older in one sense, even though I'm considered like the baby, we have a journey, you know, that we've got to get there. And the stories are amazing, how God has worked in their life, from being a cradle Catholic to being a convert, from, it's just amazing, and how God somehow brought us all together in this class, and that he wants us to serve him in that unique way, as a deacon. And so, it's a great blessing. It's an honor and a privilege to be with these men and walk with them through this formation. And part of that formation is, you know, iron sharpening iron, right? Like this is necessary. And we have a great blessing of having a robust formation program and geographically condensed archdiocese where we can all come together on a regular basis and have that fraternity that really is crucial.
Yeah.
Part of our formation.
Do the wives get pretty close with each other?
Yeah. There's a wives formation aspect to that where they meet and share their stories, and they have different topics where they get to kind of prepare from the wife's perspective what it's like to be a wife of a deacon.
Sure. Mm-hmm. I want you to share, in the couple of minutes we have left, just a couple maybe just nuggets or pearls of wisdom that you've learned during formation. So the first would be tips and tricks for a happy marriage. Obviously, that could be its own YouTube video, its own conversation, its own series. But I mean, you and your wife have been through a lot, and I'm sure you've learned some things along the way that you'll be passing on to other married couples as a deacon, God willing, and maybe just touch on that a little bit.
You do things imperfectly, right? Like we failed a lot. We're both need God's grace to preserve us. I think communication, understanding how we communicate, how we handle different stresses and different things like that, being able to clearly communicate that and kind of not avoid conflict.
Sure.
But to be able to handle it in a productive way. And for both my wife and I, we're kind of conflict avoiders for different reasons. So we've had to kind of learn how to bring those things up so that we can find that healing and that
things
that
fester if you don't kind of get it out in the open, right?
So there's that's good to be able to do that. What else for us as a married couple? Just the importance of prayer. Like you start formation and you think like, I've been Catholic, I know how to pray, I do those things. I'm pretty close to God,
Yeah.
And then
I'm here. I'm doing something right. Yeah.
The question people, are you ready? Are you ready? And I was like, I think God has opened my eyes to realize how, like, the distance. He's humbled me in the sense of like, you're not as far along as you think you are.
Sure.
But he's encouraged me in consolation after consolation to keep on pursuing him, to not let that daunt me, where before that would maybe cause me to stop.
Yeah. Or
to say, I can't do it, but to trust in him that he's going to pull me along there. Yeah. So don't give up in the midst of that struggle, and just to learn to trust the Lord. And just, I think the big thing, really, like year of Eucharistic revival, spend time before his Eucharistic face and let him transform you. Yeah. Just silence and just be in his presence. Invaluable.
Yeah. Those are great. Hard to top just sitting alone with it's a go-to. So last one, and we'll get you out of here. I think I talk a lot when I'm interviewing people here, like the world is what it is right now. It's a at the very least a unique societal context that the church is operating in, where the world's becoming more and more secular, or whatever way you want to characterize that. So I think what a lot of just average Catholics ask themselves a lot is like, what can I do? Like I can pray that things get better. I can pray that I continue to have the great freedoms that we have in this country, praise God. But other than prayer, like what are some practical things that Catholics can do to bring Jesus and the gospel to their everyday life? Obviously that means something different for you as a deacon than it does for us.
I think you hit it. It's prayer and action, fruit of our relationship with Christ as he's calling us. He's calling us to be obedient, and a part of obedience is to listen. We have to sit in prayer and listen, and then part of that is then having the courage to take action on what he's telling us. We're fallen, we're imperfect, we're not going to always get it 100% right, but he wants to take action. He can correct us and move us in that action to where he really wants us. If we go back to prayer, that didn't work out quite right, is that really what you wanted me to do? But it's that dialogue. So you have to be willing to have that dialogue. And I think something that we've lost today is just like the great, for me, is a bulwark and pillar of my faith of 2,000 years of much holier men and women who have lived this faith and built up this church, that it's okay to question things because we're asking, and that's how we grow and strong, but don't just reject 2,000 years of the church. It's a miracle, the fact that only human institution is not going to last 2,000 years, and history proves that, right? So there's something else about the Catholic Church. It's not the sinful man that is part of it that we need to anchor ourselves to. So don't just throw off the church. Go to the catechism, learn the faith, wrestle with your questions in the world and the situations and our fallenness, and give the weight that she deserves, to be the respect that she deserves, I think, is to go to those sources. Ask your priest, ask your deacon the tough questions. They want to wrestle with you. They want to be there with you in that journey and walk with you.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for the time.
Yeah.
We're going to make sure that you have time to eat, catch up with your wife, and then get off to formation tonight. But I appreciate you squeezing this in. Awesome conversation. And thanks for saying yes to the Lord. And blessings the rest of the way as the journey continues, Bob.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you for watching as well. Be sure to subscribe. If you haven't already, you can check us out at stpaulseminary.org and on Facebook and Instagram as well. Thanks as always for watching, and God bless.